Today I would like to present to you some new ideas for justifying Arabic text. Lately there has been considerable discussion around the subject. For example, at the latest A-Type I conference, Aida and Mamoun Sakal presented their assessment of the problems with the current approach. Also, on the University of Reading typography site, Titus Nemeth has written extensively on the current situation, in addition to giving some historical background. Their ideas have helped to clarify my own. I would like to thank Patrick Jasson also for his comments on my preliminary ideas. In the past 200 years or so, typographic technology has undergone many shifts. Each change in technology has affected all the scripts dependent on the equipment, including Arabic. On this slide we see 4 different samples. At the very top is hand-composed type from the 1800s. In the middle, a handset type from the late 1800s and early 1900s. At the very bottom, machine set type that began to appear in the 1920s and survived many decades into the century. Finally, on the right, we see a sample of a digital typeface in a contemporary newspaper. If we compare the glyph sets of this font to the samples on the left, we note that it's quite reduced compared to them. This reduction in glyph set came about during the 1970s from the use of phototype. Lurking in the background for the entire 20th century was the typewriter. In this image prepared by Titus Nemeth, we see the use of the flat kashida, the stretcher character, to extend use in order to justify lines. This practice became very commonplace and was later absorbed into typography. Recently, Mamoun Sakal noted that the heavy use of the kashida has actually become a style of its own. This graphic demonstrates the use of such stretched characters in a typical logo or display application. Now, going back in time 200 or 300 years, let's examine some older practices related to justification. Here we see a page from a Turkish book called Tuhf ve Vehbi, The Treasure of Vehbi, published in Istanbul around the end of the 1700s. On the right, we have a partial close-up of the text so we can see the typeface in more detail. It's quite handsome and aims to stay close to calligraphic practice. At that time, Turkish was commonly written in Arabic script. Note also that the columns are both justified. Looking over the pages of this book, I will point out various ways in which text was justified. On this particular page, we see 3 examples using wider variants of certain characters: the kaf, the ye, and the aleph. Let's begin with the kaf at the top. Here we see a stretched version of the kaf, equivalent to the shorter one here. In fact, the 2 character sequences are identical. It's a kaf followed by an aleph. Moving down here, we see the sequence of a sin followed by aleph, likewise here, where the aleph is a very stretched version. And as you can see, the stretching is all curved. We don't have any flat stretching happening here. Meanwhile, down here, we see the same word in the yellow square, while the final letter ye is in compact form here, while it is in a prolonged form, a wider form here. These two appearances are identical in meaning. However, graphically, this one is much wider. In this set of examples, a curved kashida is inserted between two letters, in one case resulting in a changed form of the preceding letter. In this example, we see the letters he, re, h, and r in Arabic, here in the compact form, while down here we see it with an inserted stretcher. However, the remaining characters around it are more or less the same. In this case, we see the sequence of ha, aleph, here in compact form, while here the aleph is a stretched form. In the case of the stretched form, we notice that the form of the ha has been opened up, while in the compact form it is closed and cupped. Both are stylistically equivalent, semantically equivalent, but the addition of a stretch caused the form to change from this one to that one. On this particular slide, we see several characters, again, stretched through the addition of kashidas, but in one particular case that's very interesting. We note this digraph, the sequence of mim, re, m, and r, substituted by an equivalent digraph of completely different style. Of course, the main difference here is the width. So the choice of this variant is also a choice to add width to the line. Moving forward again about 200 years, let's get a quick overview of what the OpenType spec offers in terms of justification. The JSTF table, justification table, allows us to define a set of parameters for any pair of script and language. This includes a list of extender glyphs, such as the kashida, basically glyphs that can stretch the line, as well as code that can either shrink the line or extend it. Considering the very elementary state of Arabic fonts at that time, this was a very ambitious attempt to support justification. Unfortunately, developers have found it difficult to implement this specification, and the JSTF table has remained largely unsupported. You might then be asking, what has taken its place? Here we see a sample of text set in Palatino Arabic. The top paragraph is an extract from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the text is unjustified. In the bottom paragraph, the text is identical, but is set justified. The top line of the bottom paragraph isn't affected at all by the justification, while the middle line has incurred the insertion of some kashidas. Now I'd like to show the characters that were changed in the process. We can see through these green rectangles where the insertion occurred. Some of the places are chosen aesthetically, some are not. None of them are bad, but had this been done manually, I would have, for example, foregone this insertion and put it here between the sin and the aleph instead for a more balanced look. However, this tells us something. It tells us, even in the best of cases, the font maker and the typesetter are really not in control of this process at all. By way of introducing a new model for justifying text, where the font maker and the typesetter are in control, I would like to demonstrate a simulated action on the same paragraph we've seen before. Here I've set the same text in Sakal Kitab, very recently released, because it includes a rich set of variants. The top paragraph is set in its normal state, no manual interventions, while the second paragraph is justified through interword spacing only. The last paragraph has been subjected to my manual intervention, where I have selectively replaced glyphs by wider forms in order to achieve justified lines. Now, I would like to demonstrate in more detail the changes that I have done. Basically, anything you see in a green rectangle has been replaced with respect to the previous condition of the line. So we see various occurrences of wider alepphs, some much wider, some of medium width. We see a wide variant of the kaf instead of the narrow one. We see a swash form of this ye. We see a swash form of the nun. The re is stretched, but as you can see here, it's stretched in a curved form and not by use of a flat kashida. The final lam here is a wider version. Nothing semantically has been changed in this text. Everything is semantically identical to the top paragraph, but without resorting to flat kashidas, we have managed to achieve justified lines. So how do we translate a series of operations of this sort into something structured? How do we make this approach speak the language of OpenType? As a first step, we create a set of methods we need to convert the concepts into realistic data structures in OpenType. What do we need to do? As a first step, we need to slide 13 over. We need to be able to translate sequences of substitutions into predictable, realistic data structures in OpenType. As a first step, we need to create a set of methods. Methods are substitution lookups that perform substitutions of glyphs by equivalent form. Here we see examples of such substitutions that we've used in our previous case. Of course, we can go into more complex cases than these. As a second step, we can take the methods that we have created to substitute sequences by wider ones and arrange them within something I will call a justification style. Let's define this new entity. What does a justification style consist of? A justification style consists of a list of methods to be executed. Each method is associated with 3 additional parameters. An area of the line to be targeted. You could think of it as a zone of the line, like the middle or the beginning or the left or the right. A number of times to be repeated, and the direction. In this particular case, we see 4 methods being invoked. Method 3 is repeated, is invoked twice. The direction of method 2 is going from left to right. We can see that some will be executed only once, some twice, some 4 times. And in some cases, for example, we can choose a random location of the line or a random directionality. Justification styles will be defined by the font maker and will be applied by the typesetter. The execution of justification styles will depend on the OpenType processor, a portion called the justification processor. You might be wondering, so what would happen if we apply a style and it doesn't fully justify a line? Well, in those cases, which I think will be quite unusual, we need to provide some fallback methods. The 2 methods that I can think of are the insertion of kashidas, and the second would be interword spacing. Now, in the spirit of allowing the font maker full control, the automatic insertion of kashidas can only happen if the font maker explicitly allows it. And if allowed, the font maker must also provide a list of contexts where it's permissible to insert kashidas. Second, interword spacing is a very simple method of adjusting for small differences and spreading it out over the whole line. So with these 2 methods, even if only one of them is allowed, it should be possible to achieve full justification. Now, this is just the beginning. What comes next? Collection of comments, lots of discussion, lots of refinement, and hopefully in the end a proposal. To that end, I invite and welcome your comments, and I will also welcome your questions in a few moments. Thank you for your attention.